Okay, Sperry, so hello, good afternoon. I'm so glad that I am here with you. It's been so long since I haven't seen you. And well, I am aware that you were working with Jacobo and Ruth. So I'm so glad that you are here in this Neuroespacio. So if you're ready, I'm going to start asking you some questions.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's lovely to be doing this with you and Ruth and your group.
Thank you. So the first question is, what is your experience studying consciousness?
Well, that's a very broad and deep question. I first became aware of being consciousness in this lifetime when I was 4 years old, and I had a tree limb fall on my heart, and I was out for 7 hours. And while I was not in a body, there was no me. Uh, there was no things. There was just this awake awareness that was aware of itself, that was supported by a void, an absence, which was giving rise to an experience of conscious presence. There was no boundary, no time, and just this eternal now, like the eternal now in which we are here and here and here every moment. We're, in a sense, because we are identified with our perceptions, which are changing and are never the same way twice, we tend to feel that we're in a flow of time, that things are changing, and they are. We are incomparably unique every moment. And through meditation and contemplation, uh, I have realized how to notice what is unchanging as well as what is changing. So they both can occur together. The quality of consciousness that I experienced in the near death experience was more what I would call an aspect of awareness, which I would call awakeness. It's like a mirror. When we step in front of our mirror in the bathroom, the mirror doesn't change, but it receives and reflects how we appear at the level of form, what our emotions look like, whether we've got egg on our face, uh, and we see ourselves at the level of form in some fresh and new way, moment by moment by moment. We're always changing and evolving and reflecting and receiving, like a mirror, in the same way that the mirror is choiceless and has no image of its own. Deep down, what we are as consciousness, which we could find vast agreement over thousands of years, especially in the East, that consciousness is choiceless at one level, and at another level, it is able to choose what to pay attention to and what to not pay attention to, and in that way cause and effect and cause karma, so that we individually become responsible for how well we pay attention and what we pay attention to, not only individually, but indivisibly together, and this in the current time as 8 billion people. So to preview a later question that I know you want to ask, my work is about discovering how 8 billion people, the whole of humanity, can notice that which is unchanging about us, that which is this awake awareness, which unites everything at the level of form, like a mirror receives and reflects each one of us when we step in front of our bathroom mirror. So by being awake as that which is unchanging, it's widely agreed that consciousness, or this awakeness that is really a facet of consciousness, consciousness means con, which is with, I'm sure you see that from the Spanish, that with sentience in a sense. So when we use the word compassion, it means sharing the passion of life, the suffering of life, the 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 joy of life, uh, similar to the word empathy. So consciousness really requires two aspects. Uh, Now, you and I are sharing consciousness right now. Uh, we are conscious together as that CON with. We are being with this, our awakeness, which is neither yours nor mine. It's ours. It's what we are fundamentally as consciousness. Now, I really needed to understand what consciousness is or what awakeness is after having that near-death experience at the age of 4. So my mind, my body, heart, and mind as a human being was constantly like gnawing, like I was hungry and never satisfied, that I couldn't resolve this need to understand, especially at this level of the new brain, the conceptualizing new brain, which is like a child asking its mother, the heart felt empathic intelligence, and the reptilian, largely male conditional love of the reptile, eat or be eaten. Like, are you going to be lunch or are you going to try to eat me? So there is this standoff at the physiological level of what's my territory and what's yours. Are you encroaching on my territory? Are you respecting me? There's all these levels of the reptilian consciousness. And if an animal steps into a clearing in the woods or in the pasture, it's natural to become very still and very silent. And I experienced this throughout my life as well. And I think it's very normal for all of us to know this and have experienced it, is that when we step into a group or people we don't know or a place we've never been, there we check in by accessing our stillness or our innermost silence, our deepest embodied sensitivities and feelings, to see whether we sense whether there might be some danger. Is it possible that someone might suddenly appear out of nowhere and attack us or greet us, or something might happen that is unexpected? And so we want to be very wary because we are very vulnerable. We're very delicate. We're easily harmed. And so we need that ability to like psychically sense whether there's a possibility of reward or danger in every single moment of our lives. So many people report, as you know, about driving a car and then suddenly they'll see an image that there's some danger that is imminent that's shown to them psychically, and they pull over to the side of the road, and then in that next moment, some truck crashes into the guardrail, and if they hadn't paid attention, they would have been killed. So my experience of consciousness is like that of many others. It's unique to me, but it's about being able to navigate the physical, emotional, and mental world. And the more I have learned to notice what I'm sensing, what I'm feeling in my heart of hearts, and in my new brain, largely the left hemisphere, which is connected to the right hemisphere by millions of neurofibers. The right brain is largely nonverbal. It's connected by the vagus nerve to the reptilian sensory motor and the mammalian limbic system. So it's monitoring this new child, this verbal analytic, conceptualizing new part of us, which has emerged like leaves or a branch would emerge out of a tree as it grew, out of a seed ultimately. So it's really quite amazing what we are. So to not just think about this, what I'm describing, but actually feel it, not only individually, but indivisibly together. So the near-death experience really showed me when I was coming out of it as a 4-year-old little boy, I asked, why would I need to have had this experience? I was very, as I came back into my body, heart, and mind as a 4-year-old little boy, I was like naturally, curious, like, what just happened? Why did that happen? Why did that need to happen? And before I could even finish asking the question, I was shown that the whole of nature and all that we are, all of us, oscillates, fluctuates in and out of form, and that refreshes and recreates and regenerates and represents us to ourselves. So it was many years before I was old enough to really realize that I could even pursue a greater and deeper, more complete understanding of who and what I am as consciousness. But eventually, when I went to college and I was interested in studying physics, there was so many unsolved riddles in physics. It was like, okay, so there's this universe that's expanding at the speed of light. Well, what's beyond that? What is it expanding into? What is light? What are we? Who are we? What the heck is going on here? And so I began to feel bold enough and courageous enough to begin to contemplate what I didn't know, because that can be very painful and scary and feel very debilitating to be ignorant and innocent. We normally, I find, prefer, having worked with thousands of people for over 40 years, last 40 years plus, to explore this. What are other people experiencing about being consciousness? What are they encountering? And comparing notes and seeing what kind of fears and what kind of joys and why do they, what happens when they feel this undivided, embodied, awake, aware, heartfelt consciousness with their beloveds, with their children, with their friends and neighbors, and with total strangers. What's happening there for humanity? So this became a real passion for me, is to experientially explore, not only what I'm experiencing, but what am I experiencing with other people, and what are they experiencing with me, and what are we all experiencing in groups, sometimes as many as 1,000 people, all sharing a commonly sensed, wholly heartfelt, conscious intelligence in a fully embodied way in nature. In Central Park in New York City, for example, in one example, or on a cruise ship, I was invited to come on and hold and facilitate these groups. And so we were all floating on the ocean, and there's something, people talk about oceanic consciousness, that actually consciousness, the feeling of being consciousness feels very oceanic, like we are something so vast and limitless that you can't even imagine it. It's so gigantic and amazing and unimaginably astounding, and yet we are it, not only alone, but together. So all my life, I have felt like I was every bug and leaf and person, not only those bugs and leaves and trees and creatures that I was around. We had 15 dogs and gerbils, and I had a parakeet, and we had chickens, and we had ducks, and the ducks would give birth to little duckies, and they would run around, and we had a horse. So we had a lot of creatures to feel with, and we loved them all, of course, and they loved us. And my mom and dad were both artists, very creative, eccentric, imaginative people. And my dad and mom were both painters. My father would draw or paint almost every day of his life. Uh, Even when he was relaxing, he'd be sitting in his chair watching on his little tiny television he had uh, with people playing tennis, little miniature people, and he would draw them on the television from the television screen on his tiny little pad with his pencil and try to make drawings of these people playing tennis together. If my mother took him out somewhere, he would just go with her to keep her company, and he'd sit in the car and he'd even draw the parking meter while she was off doing something. And he'd have these beautiful pencil drawings of parking meters or people sitting by the side on a bench or something like that. He just was constantly observing and feeling and relating to life and nature. And he's a very beautiful, very sensitive, very funny person. He's one of the funniest person that I've ever known, and he'd make us all laugh because he also at the same time a moment he couldn't decide whether he was being funny or being serious. So he would go back and forth between being funny and being serious, and that would make us laugh because how could he be serious about what he was making so much fun of? So that was a great lesson to learn from my father. And so that's part of my consciousness, what I experienced about sharing consciousness with my father. And my mother she was a lioness, very fierce lioness, and she took care of all of us. And she'd say, here's, we'd all sit down at the dinner table, and she would make the dinner and serve it to us on our plates. And she'd say, here's dinner number 1,794,000. I hope you like it, in a kind of almost resentful way, like, why don't you cook dinner, you silly things? So this is all consciousness. It's all about constantly sharing with each other our point of view, and how do we digest and receive each other's point of view. It's very, because we're fresh and new every moment, it's very, very complicated. And in order to do it well, we have to really relax, cultivate meditative, contemplative innocence and effortless concentration, thoughtless awake awareness, so that we don't pollute what we're feeling as this mirror-like, choiceless, awake awareness. We can receive and reflect like a mirror choicelessly and make much more sense of all that we've ever experienced, all that we've ever thought and felt, and all that we imagine we might ever feel and do, and whatever we might become. And so in every moment, I find that I'm recalling, in some sense, largely unconsciously, but still I can feel that it's happening. I'm recalling everything that I have ever experienced, comparing it to what I am experiencing right in the moment, and comparing that to what I might ever experience. And trying to imagine what's coming. Is there danger? Is there joy? Is there possibilities? And so that past, present, and future are all actually happening together. I was actually born with a Mercury retrograde, which many people say, oh, it's Mercury retrograde, everything's going to fall apart. Well, people who were born with Mercury retrograde, we have this sense of past, present, and future all occurring. Like we look at the present from the point of view of the possible future and from the point of view of what we've experienced in the past. And then we look at it from the present to the past at the same time that we're looking to the possible future in every possible combination. So it's like a weaving together. We call this in the scientific literature, which has actually been studied as clairvoyance by physicists. And there's a wonderful book that I would highly recommend to everyone called by Larry Leshan. That's Leshann. He, with Joyce Goodrich, studied the work of Olga Worrell, who could just focus for a few seconds on someone who had broken a bone, for example, who had their bone x-rayed, and then by just her focusing on their bone, just holding the person's leg, they could then x-ray the bone and see that it has never been broken. So there was spontaneous remission. The healing could take place through consciousness. And I experienced this myself. I studied mystical, psionic development with a woman named Tamara Diaghilev, who was the daughter of a Diaghilev who had worked with as a parapsychologist with Carl Jung. And at a certain point, I said, Tamara, do you think I'm ready to heal or do psychic readings? And she said, yeah, sure, go ahead. Give it a go, see how it goes. And just don't charge any money, just trade with other people, offer your services for trade. So I didn't think I could do it, but immediately I was able to do it amazingly well. And I saw that other people in the classes I was with her who didn't even believe it was possible, did amazing things that unbelievable accuracy. So we have examples in consciousness how not only can we bring about spontaneous remissions of very, very difficult, very deadly diseases and physical bones and organs that are going bad, and they can be completely renewed as though they're brand new, heart valves or whatever. That in remote viewing, if you are interested in that as another example of consciousness, and then I'll stop. The Farsight Institute is the only public institute studying remote viewing, and they have worked with some of the most brilliant remote viewers. Many of them were trained by a friend of mine who was the most outstanding remote viewer that anyone had ever seen, Ingo Swan, who's not with us anymore. But these people have shown and documented and shown under controlled conditions that empirically that they can go and remote view distant places in space as well as in time and actually do psychic operations on the psychophysiology of people that have already had the problem decades in the past in this eternal now, and operate on them and make it possible for them to remember what they're experiencing where they would ordinarily not remember it. And the ETs have also said that the whole universe is really coordinated by a single dimensionless point. And how we can understand that is that the 3 dimensions of space is like a geometry, okay, that is made of point coordinate locations that are relative to each other. So in 3 dimensions, these coordinate locations are changing their spatial relationship to each other in space over what we call clock time at different rates, at different frequencies, according to certain wavelengths, so that everything that is happening in 3 dimensions is coordinated as an undivided whole. And what has been missed by contemporary physics is that every one of these dimensionless points is still undivided from the original void that underwent collapse in space over time, over clock time, so that every dimensionless coordinate location in 3 dimensions at one level shares a single polar point, a single dimensionless point which unites all points in 3 dimensions, which makes the whole of 3 dimensions instantaneously united every single instant of what we call clock time. So this is why we can do remote viewing, why we can heal people remotely or just with hands-on. We can heal ourselves. We can, by how we pay attention and what we pay attention to and how well we pay attention and what we think, we can create our own reality, both negative and positive, depending on the quality of our thought, because we are actually uniting the entirety of space-time, energy, and matter, mind and body, all 2 trillion galaxies at latest count, and I'm sure there's many, many more that we can't see or detect, but we are literally localizing the non-local universe at every point in our 3-dimensional body right this moment. And in doing so, we are deconstructing, regenerating, and representing ourselves to ourselves at the level of form. And that's essentially what a mirror does. It deconstructs us into a 2-dimensional surface of dimensionless points and reflects us back to ourselves. In the case of that, a mirror in 3 dimensions, it's doing it at the speed of light. But in the 4th dimension of space, which is different than the 4th dimension of time, what we do is we make the 5th dimension a dimension of time, and the 4th dimension a dimension of space. And we've shown how Dr. James E. Beikler, Beichler, and I have been working together for the last 6 years, that we both came to each other and showed each other how to bring forward the whole of physics to this new level. And we each had our own contribution to that, but each of our contributions were so significant that we agreed to own our model as what we had co-created together. And Dr. Beikler is far more rigorous. He was a professor of physics for 35 years. He has 70 published papers that are available on academia.edu. Many of you who want to learn more about the in-depth physics of it can go there and find him under Jim Beikler, Beichler. So, and you can also find me there under Sperry Andrews on academia.edu. There's tens of thousands of scientists that use academia.edu. So you'll find that very fascinating, and you can put your own papers up there and join the crowd. So maybe I'll pause there, giving you quite a lot to contemplate and consider.
Okay, wow, all of that. Well, everything that you are telling us, it's very interesting. And for sure, it was like really shocking, or I think it must be really like difficult for a 4-year-old like baby to understand what was happening at the time. So yes, that's very interesting. Now, Andrew, well, sorry, Sperry, what do you think, or what evidence, sorry, do you have about the collective consciousness that human beings share?
Well, I have this experience of undivided attention creating or orchestrating and organizing how I am and how I am with other people uh, from doing these groups as well. Um, when a whole group can share undivided attention in a fully heartfelt, embodied way, there's this mutual understanding, which everybody can be guided by our combined heartfelt intelligence. It's amazing. And I would do this in organizations which were hierarchical, and the groups would realize that they don't need to be led by a leader. They could be better off leading the co-leading their organization, but because the experience that they had had with me was temporary, they would come to the conclusion that it was overwhelming and there was no chance that they could convince the rest of the people in their group because they didn't know how to bring about that unity consciousness as a consistent, constant state of mutual understanding, that they would just leave the organization. The whole organization would collapse. So that was very problematic for me. I was like, oh my goodness. Well, maybe if I teach this in communities that are committed to living together. So I went to many different communities and looked for a community that I would like to live in. And people were still very adverse to adopting unity consciousness because it forced them to feel what they had suppressed or repressed, where they had been traumatized from when they first were born as little babies and were objectified by their caregivers, by their mother and father, as a separate, isolated thing, as opposed to coming in as a little baby. You feel like you're undivided from the whole universe. You don't feel afraid that you are ignorant. You feel a sense of joy and well-being and confidence that all is well, because you do feel that indivisibility of being with the whole of nature and your caregivers. But when you're told this is your mother, that's your father, that's your sister, that's your brother, that's not your toy. Give your toy back. Don't do that. Eat your oatmeal or I'll slap you, you know. So at some deep instinctual level, we realize that we're not going to survive very well as a separate, isolated, self-isolating, mind-made, human. And so there's this chaos and overwhelming fear that we can't trust the people, our caregivers, that we depend upon for our very lives. Now, so these are all tests that we all perform, but not very consciously. So because of my near-death experience, I had a lot of respect for being nobody going nowhere forever as this awake awareness, which was eternally present and had no boundary and was timeless and ever present. So I wondered whether it would be possible to create a scientific experiment to empirically demonstrate this to the scientific, military, industrial, political, medical establishment, which were creating such a problem because they're all trying to control everything. They're like, I am in power. I have all the money and all the power of government, and I'm a captain of industry. I've got better education than you. I've got a lot more money in the bank than any of you guys. So just shut up and let me rule the world. So you have all these demigods and tyrants dominating secretly. They're not going to tell you they're going to do it. They're just going to do it without telling you because they just feel you're a slave or you're an idiot. And you wouldn't understand anyway. So just shut up and work 9 to 5, and we'll pay you a tiny little pittance, and that's all you get. So shut up. So I said, well, it seems to me that if we're going to shift the separative mindset of humanity, we've got to somehow popularize collective consciousness. So I actually wrote to and ultimately called up Russell Targ, who was one of the three laser physicists that had been hired by the United States federal government to compete with the Russian research in psychic phenomena. And I said to Russell, I gave him this idea that I had to do experiments with where attention, present moment attention would be used as the stimulus under controlled conditions in a research study. And he said, well, you know what? You should get a hold of Dr. William Broad at the Mind Science Foundation. He's the senior research associate there. And he thinks that if we all meditate, we'd have world peace. So, and he'd sort of roll his eyes and go like, well, that's just William, he's one of those peaceniks or whatever. So I had met up at this point with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake in one of his seminars in New York City, because he's from the UK, and he was looking at morphology or the of memory, his morphogenetic theory, and he was beginning to do these staring experiments where he'd have people in the same room and with their backs to someone, have maybe 4 or 5 people sitting in chairs with their backs to somebody over here that would take turns staring at one of the 5 people from behind when they had no known way of knowing when or if they were being stared at. And then if somebody felt they were being stared at, they'd raise their hand, and Rupert would take that down and he would do a statistical analysis of whether people could detect whether they're being stared at, because we often have that experience. We could be in an elevator and we feel somebody behind us is staring at us and turn around and realize, oh, catch the person staring at us, or we're staring at somebody in an elevator, or even driving in a car. I've found I'd be pull up next to somebody and I'd go look over and I could feel them feeling me stare at them, and they'd look over and catch me staring at them. So it's a very funny experience. And so I felt like, we should be able to test this under scientific controlled conditions. So Dr. William Broad had already been doing experiments like this, where he was even doing it with animals. He had done an experiment where he had an aquarium where one of the walls of the 4 walls of the aquarium was a 2-way mirror with a light bulb on the outside of the aquarium that would turn on and off like a coin flip. About 50% of the time it would come on, and the other 50% it would go off. By this physicist who was one of his co-workers, who I came to know, Helmut Schmidt, who designed these random event generator experiments in Mind Science Foundation. So William had it set up with one of these random event generators that became the basis of Dr. Dean Radin's work, which has become world famous, and all the eggs that are planted around the world that are noticing random events becoming non-random when with 9/11 or Princess Di's funeral or whatever it is, some level where millions of people become emotionally charged. It affects these random event generators to demonstrate that our focused attention as a collective on this planet is actually affecting technology. And this has also been explored, or is being explored, by the Heart Math Institute, where Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and her husband, who's passed away, they both passed away now, Bill Rauscher, constructed these magnetometers that could read the structure of the magnetosphere of the Earth in the higher atmosphere, and they could see when thousands of people were all focused together on trying to heal the situation in Iran or Iraq or whatever, that it would affect the magnetosphere, and the magnetosphere would actually affect measurably, under controlled conditions, affect the psychophysiologies and the neurophysiologies of the people in these large experiments that the HeartMath Institute put on. Well, this all happened after these experiments that I offered and to interest William Broad in back in 1988. So he did an experiment with a little over 30 people at the Mind Science Foundation, where they were stared at over a closed circuit camera monitor system, which is what I suggested to do. I said to Rupert, we should do this where there's no way that anybody could sense, like through heat reflected off of their face when it's done in person, might heat up the other person's back of the person's neck ever so slightly, and they could detect that. So maybe they're getting triggered by some understandable trigger. So if we remove them from each other and use closed circuit camera monitor systems under shielded conditions in a scientific laboratory, which Dr. William Broad had, we can see if people can tell whether they're being stared at over camera monitor systems when the camera remains on the entire time, and they have no known way of knowing when or if they're being stared at otherwise. And while they're being measured for galvanic skin response, which is called GSR. And so there are various ways of taking GSR measures, which I won't go into right now, but it's a very, very trusted and true way of measuring whether it's used in lie detector tests, for example, whether you're emotionally excited or whether you're very calm. And so what we found with the 32 people which were the initial experiment, when they were stared at, when they had no known way of knowing when or if they were being stared at, they were made nervous or excited or emotionally charged more than they would when they were not being stared at, so to a highly statistically significant degree, like greater than 0.05%, which is 1 out of 20 basically. But it was lower than that. So it was definitely significant that people were responding that way, 32 people consistently. And we also had measured which of those 32 people have a certain psychological preference, because there are people who they feel nervous in the presence of, when they're with people in the same room, but if they're in an adjoining room and there are people in the room next to them, they feel calm because they feel like, well, at least somebody's nearby. And so I don't feel completely alone. So it's a particular psychological profile. We did these, what's called a psychological instrument, where people would check off all these questions on this psychological instrument, and we would find out, okay, who has this profile where they feel more relaxed when they're in a separate room and there's somebody in the next room. So those people responded most strongly to being gazed upon when they had no way of knowing when or if they were being stared at. We call these the staring experiments. And we can actually look at the epoch just before staring occurred, like a second or a half second before, and like Jacobo did, where he was looking at the second or half second before, and then he'd look at after the stimulus response or reaction of the nervous system, he'd look at the next after the stimulus, the second half second after, a second after, and he could see a well understood reaction to the million candle power strobe affecting the neurophysiology of the person. Well, in the same way, we could see that before and after effect in the staring experiments. this was long before I knew anything about Hako's work or what he was doing. But it's how I ended up finding out about it, because maybe William said, well, there's this fellow who's doing experiments, who is showing the morphology of the developing nervous system neuroscientifically, and you might want to look into that, Sperry, because he didn't know anything about it. So that's how I ended up going down to Mexico a couple of times and staying with Teresa and Hako in their home, and going to their laboratories and being participating in the experiments. That's how I met your mom. She and I spent time together when we first met, just like hanging out, going to the zoo or something, or going to an art gallery, and becoming familiar with each other, and meditating together, so that when we were in the experiment, when she or I were blasted with a million candle power strobe for a microsecond, for three microseconds, I think it was, that we might be more likely to be empathic neurologically with each other, which was very cool. I really loved your mother. She was so wonderful, and we just became instant friends, and she was so brilliant as a neuroscientist, and would lecture and gave presentations on Hako's work, and it was absolutely amazing to meet her and get to know all the people that were working with Hako.
Yes, thank you
So,
so much. So, yes, now, in your opinion, what do you suggest in order to expand consciousness in humanity?
well, let me just finish up about those experiments just a little bit, because then Dr. Broad had me come down and train a new group to share a commonly sensed consciousness in a fully embodied way together, and then test them. And he would use various means to figure out that those people were, equal more or less to the last group. And when those people were stared at, they were relaxed rather than made nervous. And the chances of that occurring by chance alone was 0.0044, which was hugely significant. So obviously people can learn to be conscious of each other at a distance. William Broad actually demonstrated that he could have people focus and assist people in being able to focus better, because this remote person, when they had no way of knowing, was helping them to focus on a specific task that actually would help people, and that you could actually affect psychophysiological indices in ways that as greatly as individual people could affect their own psychological and physiological indices. That's kind of scary that other people can affect our psychophysiology as much as we can. How about that as a weird thing? So that comes back to consciousness being very powerful, because your consciousness and my consciousness right this moment is still the same consciousness. It's not divided by who you think you are and where you are on the planet compared to where I am here in Honolulu, Hawaii. We're actually an indivisible phenomena. And humanity can learn about this and experience it, not just understand it, but live it moment to moment, indivisibly. As Carl Jung said, in the process of maturation, the individual ultimately realizes, I'm paraphrasing Carl Jung in one sentence, that the individual ultimately realizes that they are indivisible from everyone and everything. And when more of us realize this, we have a chance of having a conscious civilization on this planet, period. And many have said this over thousands of years, of course, in the East as well in the West. So I'm just part of that group of people that are rooting for mass awakening and global enlightenment.
Okay, yes, and I think that's like very true that everyone can do it, right? Everyone can have this awakeness and open the consciousness.
We are it whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. It's
Yes,
inescapable. There's no choice about it. It's like the mirror is choiceless and imageless, has no image of its own, and it just does what it does. It's the only constant in the whole of consciousness. It is literally, the mirror is the void, because there's no thing to divide. It continues to, because, and everything that has form, space, time, energy, matter, mind, and body, continues to be localized and reunited by that indivisible void, such that the whole of space, time, energy, and matter, mind, and body is recreated through every dimensionless point in 3 dimensions. It's like a fountain of eternal life, like the Ponce de Leon went in search of. We are fresh and new. We are that void, which is, they say in the East, they say it's uncreated, and it cannot be destroyed. It is deathless. We are literally, as this awakeness, we are immortal. And we need to get to know our immortal, deathless, uncreated nature, because that's what I experience, and millions of other people in near-death experience have experienced, that we feel totally like we're in heaven on earth, we're in heavenly state, the joyful, peaceful, limitless love, and that's where we all go when we leave this earth plane, and which is like a schoolyard. We're like here
yes,
challenged, like, can we truly love and relax and trust how to be embodied in the 3-dimensional world, which is so demanding? We have to feed ourselves, we have to avoid being killed and eating everybody.
yes.
It's completely cuckoo. And so we have to wake up and become enlightened in order not to be traumatized or traumatize others. So the earth life, being here as a human being, is a school which we go through. And some people who go over to the other side and they're happy, they realize that they can't learn as rapidly on the other side because there's no contrast. It's not as challenging. So they come back and they take another human life and go through hell and high water. The memories wiped. They're like, don't know who or what they are again. And they're challenged by being somebody, going somewhere for some unknown reason all over again. So sorry, go ahead. What's your next question,
Yeah.
please, Tanya?
Don't worry, don't worry. Okay, now, how was your experience with Jacobo Grimmer?
Well, I had many deep experiences with Hako, and some of them a little bit troubling, because as we've learned through Ira film about Hako, Sedular, that uh, that Teresa, turns out that she probably was a CIA agent. That is not unusual for CIA agents to be put in touch with somebody that they want to study and ultimately decide whether they want to kidnap and utilize in their programs. And so I was coming back from one of the couples training program where the couples were learning to be telesomatic and telepathic with each other. Uh, Men and women who were sexually bonded, Hako felt, were be more likely to be able to be sensitive together. which was also studied at Princeton University, if you may know, and reported on in the book that was published by Harcourt and Brace by Dr. Robert John under the title Margins of Reality. Very, very fascinating, because bonded couples actually did worse under certain circumstances than people who didn't know each other working together to affect or psychically understand remote systems. So it's very interesting. And that bonded couples might actually have a harder time collaborating because they need to be conscious of themselves as unique individuals that are relating to another unique individual. And so they actually shut off some of that shared sensitivity, which can be very annoying to their partner sometimes, because they want to be mutually understood and be sensitive, their partner to be very sensitive to them. So it's like a challenging to be in an emotionally intimate relationship, because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, in a way. If that makes any sense to you. So I was coming back in Hako's truck, and I was asking him, because here I've been doing these groups for years in shared sensitivity. I said, Hako, I can feel that you're not allowing me to feel what we're feeling together. Why are you doing that? And it was very obvious. So here we've come to this training. We're training bonded couples to be sensitive together, and here I am studying global consciousness with Hako. How are we going to help humanity? And yet he's not allowing me he and I to feel this psychophysiological embodiment of our greater body, heart, and mind, which was very shocking and sort of alarming. And I said, so I was talking to him as he was driving along in his pickup truck. And he said, Sperry, I can't do that, because Teresa will feel that and she'll be furious with me. She just gets absolutely, starts screaming at me, and it's terrible. And so she can detect that I'm connecting with somebody, and usually she'll think it's a woman. She's very jealous, as many Latin people can be. And so she could detect that I've been connecting with somebody, and she won't know it's you, and she'll be very jealous and suspicious, and she won't believe me. So I can't do that with you, Sperry. So that was really tragic and very painful and sad, and made me feel like, what's going on here with Teresa, for heaven's sakes? Why isn't she supporting this development of this commonly sensed, holy, heartfelt, conscious intelligence, for heaven's sakes? Isn't that an interesting story? Wow. I mean, the context of it. Here we're coming from training couples, to share sensitively, but Hako and I, as two men, are not allowed to do that, who are working toward the unity of humanity because of Teresa, who is going to capture and kidnap and take Hako from us, so that the majority of humanity cannot benefit from Hako's research. And it was right at that moment of time, where Hako had finally gotten the agreement by two other universities in Mexico to make experiments where we could look at 3 laboratories simultaneously studying 3 or more people hooked up to instrumentation, so that we could show more definitively and unarguably incontrovertible evidence that humanity is indivisible and linked together, even though we appear to be spatially separate from each other. And it was at that very moment that Hako disappeared. That was very, very painful. And I had already presented his work at the United Nations in 1992 with 5 microphones clicked to my lapel. I showed his morphology of his graphs on a projector screen and in the Dag Hammarskjöld Auditorium at the United Nations. And there were, I don't know, maybe 70 people in the audience. I met some really amazing people that I did work with who helped me to raise funds for our project, or rather not raise funds for the project, to demonstrate this to the world with multiple laboratories, which I'd conceived of with Dr. William Broad's help at that point, and with the support of and mutual understanding of Hako.
Wow.
So
Well, yes,
that's just a tiny little fingernail of all that I could say about Hako. And
yes, for sure, yes. And it's like really sad and tragic that that happens to you.
mm,
But okay, so mhm.
well, and I mean, Hako's daughter wasn't even allowed. Hako wasn't even allowed to tell his daughter that he was actually okay. So she thought maybe Teresa killed him years ago, and that was allowed to discontinue. His own daughter was kept in the dark all those years. I mean, that's really brutal for a secret agency like the CIA that is known for its brutality, destroying governments around the world, uh, offering billions of dollars to the leaders of different nations so that those leaders of those nations all around the world would allow huge American corporations to come in and take their overuse of and ownership of their precious natural resources. And then if the people didn't like that, then the leader would take their billions and leave and run away with their international bank account, and cause this total turbulence and cruelty to nation after nation. And that the CIA would get away with that, and get away with the Kennedy assassination, and get away with so much brutality all around the world. And that part of that would be taking Hako from us so that we couldn't understand the unity of our consciousness through those 3 laboratories that he had earned the right and respect from those universities there in Mexico.
Yes, that's right. Okay, and Sperry, we have a last question. So this is, in your opinion, how do you think human consciousness investigation will progress?
Yes, well, I have, like when I was with Hako, I was looking at have 5 laboratories demonstrate our indivisibility, where these laboratories were placed in different countries. So that level of using science to successfully popularize unity consciousness has evolved over many years, since whatever it was, originally 1988 and 1992 at the United Nations, and now it's been 30 years since then. My latest project is a 5-year multimedia, $27 million project it's a partnership proposal to work together with people from around the world to dehypnotize humanity. I call it that because in my 40 years of groups with multicultural audiences, where we would go into shared sensitivity, like what Hako was training his couples to do for his experiments. I've just been doing those groups to see, does it matter what gender or what culture people are from, what nation they're from, their training? I would have translators would translate from English into Italian or into German or whatever, French. And then I have another translator on the other side of me, and they would translate from their language back into English, so I would understand what people were saying as they were saying it, so I could bring people to focus on noticing the verb, the activity, the energetic, the feeling of noticing as one body, heart, and mind, as a group of people in a gathering. We could be sitting out in nature or sitting in a room together, and we would experience spontaneous remissions. And people would say, well, I have colitis. Would you all focus on my colitis together? We'd have 40 people focusing on the colitis in the intestinal tract of this one individual, for example, in Italy. After the group with about 40 people, in total silence, we all went swimming in this river together. And then we went back inside, and he said, would you all focus on my colitis? And people would take turns asking us to focus on different ailments that they have to bring about spontaneous remission. So through the magnitude of our combined awake awareness in a fully embodied way can effortlessly, optimally recorrect the dissonance and the lack of order in the psychophysiology of an organ in somebody's body in this case, and they could find relief and freedom from that malady. And so this is something that if the whole of humanity were able to share a commonly sensed consciousness, there would be no illness. It would be literally impossible. We would mutually understand each other. We would all feel mutually understood, which when we hold a child or a beloved to our heart and we feel them feeling us, feeling them, feeling us, feeling them, that sense of shared embodiment is sharing undivided attention. And that when our attention or consciousness is undivided psychophysiologically with a lover, or in groups that I've been doing for almost over 40 years now, everybody experiences this communion of unconditional love, which is indistinguishable from sharing undivided attention. So when attention is aware of itself, like when we look into a mirror, like when I look into the webcam lens right now, and you look into my eyes, and you see our seeing, when we really see it as an activity, not as a noun, not as yours, not as mine, not as there and in here, but as something which is omnipresent and omnipotent and omniscient, which is an activity of consciousness. It's timeless, it's ever present, it's always happening, just like our hearing and sensing and breathing and knowing and unknowing and being and sharing. And so all we really need to do at the level of humanity, and all my work is about, it's so simple. All we need to do is, instead of being primarily identified with being the nouns, being me and you being you, and you're doing this and I'm doing that, you're there, I'm here, you want a chocolate sundae, I would like to have a pickle or something, and on a roast beef sandwich or something, whatever it might be, we're so obsessed as a materialistic society with who we think we are and what we want to get rid of and what we want to get for ourselves, that we're in conflict with ourselves and with each other. We feel miserable. We feel like we're never going to be complete. We're never going to have it all. But the moment we shift to the verb, the nouns, the object of the sentence, and the noun, it's like, Sperry is gazing and talking with Tanya and with all of you. So there's Sperry and Tanya that are nouns in the sentence. the nouns need to be continually changing, as are the verbs. We need to let the nouns be unfixed or not objectively solidified, so that Tanya can be fresh and new and Sperry can be fresh and new every moment, because which happens effortlessly and automatically as long as we're focused on the activity of consciousness, the recreation of our being awake and alive and sensing and feeling and embodying what is actually occurring consciously as us sharing a commonly sensed consciousness in a wholly heartfelt, fully embodied way as conscious intelligence. So it's just about shifting. And so the fact that as a preparation for these experiments and in the movies, the feature and documentary films, we train the people who in the pre-recorded film, like 3 or 4 men and women, all anchored in unity consciousness. So at the very beginning of the film, the first 5 minutes of the films, whether it's a feature or a documentary film, we are introduced to these men and women who are already awake and enlightened and sharing an undivided attention as in this void-based, unidentified, thoughtless awakeness. So they really are indivisible individuals, and they can look into the webcam lens, or in this case, into the movie camera, and that's what is called breaking the fourth wall. And they can let's say all 8 of them, 4 men and 4 women, they can all look into the camera lens together and say, hey, you there. So nobody in the audience of 200-300 people know who they're really talking about. They say, hey, you there, do you feel what we're feeling with each other and what we're feeling with you? Do you feel that with the person to your left or the person to your right? What are you feeling with them? And well, how about the person behind you or the person in front of you or the people all around you? Are you all feeling what the person we're talking to right now is feeling or not feeling with you? I mean, are you realizing what is possible here? You're safe. You're in your seat in the theater. Nobody's going to eat you. You don't have to worry about that. But just feel and sense with us, feeling what we're feeling with you, with the people around you. In fact, see what you're feeling with the 200 people or 300 people around you. As a greater body, heart, and mind, as a collective embodied consciousness, for the sake of the awakening of humanity, for the sake of the salvation of life on Earth, so that humans can wake up and stop destroying the planet. Because until we wake up, we have to destroy the individual self. We have to deconstruct it and open it up to be all that is and nothing at all, which are 2 extremes on either side of the separate self. There's the self with the capital S, which has been talked about in the East quite a bit as well as in the West. The capital S self is said that there's only one capital S self. Everything is the self, and there's only one of it. And we are all it together. And so that's a real stretch. The challenge of this is that doing this causes us to automatically begin to re-experience everything that we suppressed and repressed, from being traumatized, from being primarily treated as separate and isolated from when we first came into this world as a human being by our caregivers who we depended upon for our very lives. So we don't want to go back there, because with our very undeveloped nervous systems, we felt that we couldn't survive it. We felt that we would die, and it was so painful and terrifying. It felt like we could die from in agony. Because you remember maybe being in the crib or something and crying and crying and crying, and your mommy or your daddy didn't come to get you and pick you up. because let's say, what's his name, wrote that terrible book that told mothers and fathers, don't pick up your children if they cry, just let them cry themselves to sleep. Just, otherwise you'll spoil them. You're going to ruin your child if you pick them up when they're crying. I mean, talk about, ultra, MK Ultra, mind control, destroying the trust of children from the beginning, very beginning, as a way of training whole societies, billions of people to be not trust themselves or anyone else, so that the power elite could, who have been working it for thousands of years, really, how do you control the masses? How do you enslave them? How do you get them to work for you for almost nothing? And, kill them at will if you want, turn them into soldiers, send them out to die. They'll just do whatever you tell them because they're mind controlled, hypnotized slaves. So this is what we're up against here, people. And so the scientific demonstration through this latest project to dehypnotize humanity from being mind controlled, very, very uphill battle. Some of you may know the allegory going back to the Greeks of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus was condemned by the gods, which are like the power elite, to roll a boulder up a hill, and yet the boulder was so huge it would get away from him and roll back down the hill, and he'd have to start all over again. And he'd have to keep doing this over and over again, hundreds of years after hundreds of years, millennia after millennia, and it is tortured. And because he was given immortality, but he couldn't ever complete this task that he was tied and bound to by the gods. So please look into yourselves, people. Look into how mind controlled we all are. We have to do, by being awake as awareness, by being mirror-like, which is formless, is effortless, we can re-experience what we have shut away and locked into the basement of our unconscious. Let it come up out of the basement, encounter how angry and pissed off it is at us. It doesn't trust us because we have avoided it and disrespected its need to be cared for and cared about and loved unconditionally through undivided attention. And so initially, in my experience with getting to know our sub-personalities, those parts of us that we've disowned, initially, yeah, they're absolutely furious with us. But the moment we start really showing that we're available to share a commonly sensed, holy, heartfelt, embodied consciousness with these parts of us that have been disowned and suppressed and repressed, they very quickly forgive us, and it changes our entire metabolism. We begin to start feeling healthier and lit up and turned on. We feel released from this guilt that we didn't even know where it was coming from. We felt like we're completely crazy, and why are we so crazy? And that would make us feel very debilitated and very, very vulnerable growing up in this world. So please take care of that, people. This is a very important element in here. It's not just enough to watch scientific experiments or meditate. You've got to really deal with your own subconscious, that it was you who withdrew your attention from what you were feeling and sensing in order to avoid suffering, the pain and fear of what could harm you neurologically when you were underdeveloped neurologically. So but at a mass level, we need to work from the top down by having, hundreds of millions, hopefully billions of people brought to awareness by these films, as well as the demonstration on international news that these films are showing that we are all undivided, and we have what's it called? Reality television where you're actually seeing the filming of what's going on in the making of the films, little bits and pieces of that every couple times a week. So you see people being awake and aware in the making of the films. So it's popularized on a weekly basis, month after month, year after year. So when the films are finally ready, to have been edited and are ready to be released, people know they really are interested here. They know that they can go to these films, who hopefully could be released for free, like the movie Home, which raised the money to release the movie Home for free by 25 different corporations. So we can release these films for free, and we can also, so when people go to the films, they experience unity consciousness with total strangers in the audiences, for example, or maybe just one person alone at home watching one of the films, or one of the daily releases, weekly releases on YouTube. And because of the quality of like shared noticing, people at home, indivisible individuals, feel indivisible from us sharing our undivided attention with them. And we give people a way to enter into this common sense, by the millions and even by the billions, as digital e-commerce continues to grow. And these kinds of YouTubes are available for free any time of the day or night around the world. So the other aspect that I invented, it took me about good 15 years of meditation to realize that this could be a way to use the internet, even before it was even possible on the internet. What it's developed into is to make a free membership available around the clock in multiple languages, so people can start their own groups as well as join groups in their own language. And they can go through, watch these tutorial videos to go, like in college, to go from 101 to 102, 103, 104. So as you get better at this, you can be among those people who are more proficient or really skilled and really effortlessly able to share a common sense with other people who are on the audiovisual Zoom calls or audio only. This works very, very well, even better audio only in many cases. So you can do this on Skype, or you can do it anywhere. You get it on the phone. I've done it with the top level physicist on the phone. I asked Dr. Harold Putoff, I said, listen, Hal, just listen to and sense the quality of our listening energetically with me. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of that, we would merge and become one body, heart, and mind. You can do it just by talking over the phone with your lover or your friend, your child, or your beloved. So simple. So these groups will allow people on a mass scale, just like Facebook is for free. People will be able to, from any and through every social media platform, be able to, just at the click of the button, go into one of these groups or create their own group and enter into a commonly sensed, wholly heartfelt, conscious intelligence with total strangers. And in fact, when you do this with strangers, like when you first meet a stranger, you don't know how to divide them up into pieces. And you need to respect that stranger, because otherwise you know that the stranger is going to feel that you're not really fully available to them. So when we meet total strangers, we ordinarily share undivided attention. We look to them straight into their eyes, not all the time, but some of the time we look back up. And so that's how we meet total strangers. So when we do these groups, I've done with thousands of people, hundreds of groups over 40 years. When you have a few strangers in the group, it really helps, because then everybody has to be in a state of undivided attention, because there's strangers in the group. And you have to be respectful to the strangers in the group. So if you do groups of your own, or you meet up with strangers on a daily basis, recognize that this is an opportunity to share undivided attention with somebody that you've never met before. And that when you share undivided attention, people can feel you respecting them and that you're available to be in a conscious communion with them, and that you're available to unconditionally love them. And that is beautiful. So between men and women and women and women, beyond sexuality, we can learn as a population to just love each other unconditionally and respect each other through simply sharing unconditional, undivided attention, for heaven's sakes. So that's how we can bring this about. And if you can, help bring funding to this project. I've shared with Tanya and Ruth how to, even if it's $1, you can contribute through Give, Send, Go, and eventually we'll reach our goal of $27 million, and we'll be able to bring this work and these films and this social media step up. So the next step in social media is to, when Facebook started, people were very shy about sharing their photographs online. And they were in the beginning of Facebook, over a decade ago. And then eventually everybody just, okay, here's all my photographs of my mother, my father, sister, and brother. You can, if you befriend me, you can see my photographs and blah, blah, blah. The next step in social media is where we're actually sharing a common body, heart, and mind by seeing and feeling together with every bug and leaf and creature on this planet. Every human being is part of our body, like our own pinky, or the cells in our hand, the cells in our heart, the cells in our mind. All of us are like the cells in our greater body, heart, and mind. And we need to stretch open like we're exercising and stretching our body to be healthy. We can't fully be immortal or be deathless at a mortal level until we begin to learn how to share a common body, heart, and mind with all, 8 billion of us and all the creatures who were in the ecosystem that we're destroying by how insensitive and unconscious we are. So we need to wake up together. This is absolute live or let, it's death or life at this point for humanity and for the ecosystem of the planet. Surely the Earth will recover, as it has many times, through mass extinctions, but we are deep into the 6th mass extinction, and it's largely due to our being collectively unconscious. So we can do something about this together. So thanks so very much. Namaste. All love with you and yours.
Wow, thank you so much, Sperry. I really love the way you express and the way you say the things. So thank you so much for being here, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you and to be in this program. So yes, if you have the opportunity to to donate for this cause, we are going to leave all the information in the description. Okay? So thank you so much, Sperry. Would you like to say something else to the people who's watching you?
I think I probably said more than they would want to hear.
Yes, I also think that, but it's like a thing that we can talk all day long. But thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. It was lovely to having you.
Thank you so much for letting me just free associate and try to tie many different pieces and parts together, how it rather than clinically separate them into little bite-sized pieces, to show how woven it all together. Like this painting here, this is a painting of mine. It helped me so much to paint. My mother and father were both artists, and learn how by being in undivided consciousness, I could cause the paint without trying to control it too much, allow it to take a coherent form that I found expressive of what I was feeling non-verbally at a deep level, and find an equivalent of myself in paint. It was a wonderful discipline, and so that my paintings are now like my children. I love them like they were my own progeny. And so I hope that you all enjoy this painting, and I give you all a big hug, and I'll say, when we are aware, as they say in India, when we're aware of the one that we all are together, we say namaste. Thank you
Namaste.
so
Thank
much.
you.
All love with you and yours, dear ones. Bye for now.
Ok, chicas, chicos, les dejo con Ruth ahora. Me despido.